we should understand each other in the sense of we should all tell each other our stories and then we will understand each other. Or, as a poetic saying goes, an enemy is someone whose story you have not heard. Isn't this beautiful? Like, no, I just objectified you, I should see your side. I am opposed to this. Why? Because, okay, let's again make a simple mental experiment. Let's replace enemy with Hitler. Would you also say, Hitler was our enemy because we didn't hear his story or whatever? No. I mean, the presupposition of this is that the stories that people are telling themselves about themselves are truth. No, they can be lies, I think. Hitler did horrible things. The truth is in what he did. And the story, his side of the story, as it were, his side of the story is a lie here. So again, I just wanted to draw attention to this, that neighbor is not this, the other whom I should understand. No, neighbor is the abyss of otherness. The other, the neighbor himself or herself, is trying to escape from this abyss by telling himself stories about himself. And now I come finally to this fear, because I claim that the fear which predominates in today's politics is ultimately the fear of the neighbor, formulated as a defense against potential victimization or harassment. That is to say, did you notice how today, in our post-ideological era, where people no longer believe you cannot mobilize them for some higher cause, the only way to truly mobilize people, to introduce passion into politics, is to mobilize or to refer to fear. Left, also, not only right, unfortunately, fear of immigrants, fear of crime, fear of godless sexual depravity, fear of excessive state control, fear of ecological catastrophes, fear of harassment, and so on, and so on, and so on. It's fear which is the point. And again, this fear, I think, is manipulated in a nice way, in an exclusive way by religion. Religion precisely prohibits you to maintain some kind of meaning so that this fear doesn't overwhelm you. And I claim that even ecology, unfortunately, functions in this way, as fear of losing some kind of grounding. As if there is nature, we disturb the balance, fear is, let's not disturb it too much, let's return to it. I claim that this is the worst environmental ideology. I claim that the ABC to truly confront ecological crisis is to confront fully the fact that there is no nature. No, I'm a materialist, there is. But what I'm saying is that our spontaneous notion of nature as some kind of a balanced, holistic, whatever exchange, which is then disturbed by human intervention, is false. Nature is one big catastrophe. Nature is not balanced in itself. I claim that this image of nature as opposed to human hubris is precisely human projection at its worst. So I think that the only way to overcome this fear, I will not have time, obviously, to develop it all, but the only way to overcome this fear is through, for me, fear and terror are not two words for the same thing, are exactly the opposite. It's two. Fear is, you still think you have some roots, some grounding. You are afraid to lose it. The solution is to accept that there is no way back, in the sense of you have nowhere to return. There is no natural balance or whatsoever. That is to say that, in a way, we accept the abyss of our freedom. Or, as he put it, he here being Mao Zedong, and I don't have any specific ethico-political love for Mao Zedong. We know enough now how, for example, the famine of late 50s was planned. They coolly accepted 35 million people to die in order to be able to export food to Russia and so on. But nonetheless, there is something which incredibly attracted me in how Mao Zedong, in his famous text from 1955, Why the Chinese People Cannot Be Cowed by the American Atom Bomb, how he justifies there this lack of fear It's not what we usually, some of us who still remember. Many of you are young. You don't probably know that. 20 years ago, there was still politics. There were students organized as left. This was fairy tales, another era. Okay. At that point, and the usual version was that, so what? United States can bomb us. We have 1 billion people. They can kill 500 million. There still is 500 million. No, it wasn't this. Let's read Mao. He goes on then and says, I quote him, but even if the United States atom bombs were so powerful that, when dropped on China, they would make a hole right through the earth, or even blow the earth up, that would hardly mean anything to the universe as a whole, though it might be a minor event for the solar system. So you see the madness of Mao. Now the question is, from where does he talk? Like, oh, so what? The earth disappears, but we live in a universe, who cares? I claim that, although this is, of course, madness, but I claim that a minimum of this madness, a minimum of this madness is present in every authentic fight for struggle or whatever. You must go to this fearless point of accepting terror. Now, I was told that I can talk as long as I want, but I warn the organizers that my friends call me Fidel, no? So, it can go on. So I know that you have limits, so let me maybe just conclude by at least reporting you on what I wanted to develop. What I wanted to develop is, I don't have time, unfortunately, something about how this fear relates to violence, why violence is such a topic in the form of harassment and so on for us today. And then, the crucial point, I wanted to go into problematizing the very notion of tolerance in a critical dialogue with Wendy Brown, her wonderful last book, Regulating Aversion. Of course, the first thing to note here, it's a simple observation, which I like from Wendy, which is, are we aware how today we tend to perceive as problems of tolerance or intolerance, problems, conflicts which 20, 30, 50 years ago were not perceived as problems of tolerance. For example, remember the big moment of struggle against racism, Martin Luther King. Look, his speeches. He barely uses, I think. I made this experiment on internet. I downloaded some of his speeches and then searched tolerance, intolerance. It's practically absent, the very word. For him, racism against the blacks was not a problem of intolerance. It was the problem of inequality, exploitation, injustice, and so on. So the first question is, why do we today formulate or perceive these problems as problems of tolerance? I think it has something, quite a lot, to do with what we may call the culturalization of politics. That is to say, we all accept basically this post-political reduction of politics to post-politics, expert administration, compromises, and so on, so that then, because of this, all the remaining sources of conflict are perceived as cultural conflicts, which is why I claim there is no opposition between Fukuyama and the guy who spreads around Huntington disease, and it's appropriately called Huntington. That is to say, clash of civilizations. I claim that clash of civilizations is precisely politics at the end of history, culturalized politics. Okay, now, Wendy Brown, in a detailed criticism, tries to undermine this liberal position. Convincing as she is, I have a whole series of problems there. With her account, let me go just to the crucial problem that I see with her. The problem is that I think, of course, her criticism is the standard one. It is that we in the West have this liberal notion of what? It's very interesting how she develops it, and she is right here. It's that what is our definition of barbarian, fundamentalist barbarian? It's, to cut a long story short, pure culture. That is to say, barbarians are those who are fully identified to their culture. To be civilized means precisely not to be fully one's culture. It means, this minimum liberal freedom. I can step in, out. Culture is no longer